Ethan, the small son of the millionaire, hid in the chicken coop, afraid of the new stepmother, until the nanny. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The little Ethan, only 5 years old, trembled with fear among the ducks in the yard when he spotted the new nanny arriving down the dirt road leading to the family's ranch. His big brown eyes, too large for his thin face, observed everything with the caution of someone who had learned early to be distrustful. The boy crouched among the birds, pretending to play, but actually hiding from what could be yet another disappointment in his already tumultuous life. The Montgomery Ranch was nestled in the mountains of Aspen, Colorado, a property that exuded history and tradition. The main house, built with exposed bricks in a colonial style, stood majestically amidst gardens of hydrangeas and an orchard of century-old apple trees. The thick walls held secrets of past generations, and the creaking wooden floors whispered the mysteries that inhabited that place. Ever since his father, David Montgomery, a prosperous coffee farmer, had married Victoria, a woman 30 years younger, just 3 months ago, the former harmony of the property had transformed into a minefield of tensions. The strong and cozy aroma of brewed coffee in the main kitchen, which once brought happy memories from the time when his mother still lived there, now mixed with the cloying and expensive perfume that Victoria left in her wake, creating a suffocating atmosphere that made Ethan's chest tighten with anguish. "Dad, I don't need a nanny," murmured the boy when he saw his father approaching, accompanied by an unfamiliar woman. "I can take care of myself." David Montgomery, a 45-year-old man with graying hair at the temples and tired eyes that no longer sparkled like they used to, sighed deeply. He knew his son was lying, but he also understood the fear behind those words. Since marrying Victoria, he had noticed that Ethan had become even more isolated, spending most of his time hiding in the yard among the animals they raised. "Ethan, this is Ms. Mary," said David, gently placing his hand on his son's shoulder. "She came from very far away to take care of you. How about being polite and greeting her?" The nanny, Mary Johnson, was a well-lived 40-year-old woman who bore the marks of someone who had faced life with dignity and courage. Coming from a small village near Vermont, she possessed that simple yet profound wisdom that only comes from experience and suffering transformed into strength. Her gray hair, always tied up in a simple bun, framed a kind face where light brown eyes radiated warmth. "Hi, sweetheart," said Mary, bending down to be at Ethan's height, not forcing any closeness. Her hands, marked by time and honest work, held a small floral fabric bag from which emanated a delicious smell of homemade cheese bread. "You don't need to be afraid of me. I brought a special treat that my sister made just for you." Ethan hesitated, feeling something familiar in that sweet gaze that vaguely reminded him of his paternal grandmother, who had passed away when he was only 3 years old. It was the only affectionate memory of a female figure he held in his heart, as his memories of his biological mother were confusing and painful. "You're not going to stay long, are you?" asked the boy, his voice almost a whisper. "The others always leave." The question hit Mary like a knife to the chest. She had been hired by Mr. Smith, the caretaker who had worked on the property for over 20 years and knew the delicate situation of the family well. When he told her about the lonely boy who lived hiding around the ranch, Mary felt the call of her heart to accept the job, even if it meant leaving her homeland. "My angel, I didn't come here just to work," she replied, with the sincerity that always characterized her words. "I came because I heard there's a special boy here who needs real affection. And when we find someone special like that, we stay, you understand." At that moment, Victoria Montgomery appeared on the porch of the main house. A former beauty queen from a state contest, she possessed an artificial and calculated beauty that drew attention wherever she went. Her long blonde hair, always impeccably styled, contrasted with tight and low-cut dresses that seemed inappropriate for the rural environment of the ranch. Even at 10 in the morning, she was already wearing heavy makeup and jewelry that sparkled more than the sun in the mountains. "David, darling," she said, descending the stairs with studied steps, as if she were still on a runway. "I can't believe you brought this person without consulting me first. I had other plans for Ethan today." Victoria's tone chilled the atmosphere. Ethan instinctively hid behind Mary, who immediately sensed the tension that always arose whenever the stepmother appeared. David clenched his fists, visibly embarrassed by the rude way his wife referred to the new employee. "Victoria, we talked about this yesterday," he replied, trying to remain calm. "Ethan needs someone to take care of him properly, and Ms. Mary comes highly recommended." "Recommended by whom?" "By that caretaker who can hardly write his own name." Victoria laughed derisively, theatrically fixing her hair. "David, darling, you need to understand that Ethan is not a baby anymore. He needs discipline, not more pampering." Mary observed everything in silence, registering every word, every gesture, every nuance of that disturbing family dynamic. Her maternal instinct, sharpened by years of caring for children, the others triggered all the alarms. There was something deeply wrong in that place, and little Ethan was at the center of a storm he was too young to understand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Victoria," Mary interrupted, her voice firm yet respectful. "I came here to care for the boy with all the love he deserves. If you don't mind, I would like to learn more about where I will be working and how I can help in the best way." The look Victoria shot at Mary was filled with instant dislike. It was as if she sensed that this simple yet determined woman could pose a threat to her carefully laid plans. Ethan, still hiding behind the nanny, whispered softly, "Mary, do you promise you won't leave me alone with her?" The question was asked so quietly that only Mary heard, but it was enough for her to understand the gravity of the situation. Gently placing her hand on the boy's shoulder, she replied with conviction, "I promise, my dear. I promise." And so, in that first meeting filled with tension and suspicion, a story began that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The mountain wind whispered among the trees, as if sensing the revelations to come. Mary's first days at the Montgomery Ranch were a true lesson in how to observe without being noticed. The nanny, with the wisdom of someone who had worked in many different homes throughout her life, knew that to truly understand a family, one must first grasp their routines, their silences, and their little everyday lies. And in that house of exposed bricks, secrets seemed to float in the air like the morning mist of the mountains. Ethan woke up every day before 6 in the morning, far too early for a child his age, and ran straight to the yard where the ducks and chickens were kept. Mary discovered this on the second morning when she found him crouched among the birds, whispering secrets to them as if they were his most trusted confidants. The boy always wore the same clothes, loose t-shirts and faded shorts that seemed too big for his frail little body. "Good morning, my angel," Mary greeted, approaching slowly so as not to startle him. "How about we have a nice breakfast in the kitchen?" "I can't," Ethan replied, without lifting his eyes from the ducklings pecking around his bare feet. "She doesn't like it when I make a mess in the kitchen early in the morning. She says I leave everything in disarray and that children should eat at the right time." Mary felt her heart tighten. What kind of stepmother prevents a child from having breakfast when he is hungry? She crouched down beside the boy, observing the animals that seemed to be his only source of companionship. "And what do you usually eat in the morning then?" she asked, already fearing the answer. "Sometimes Mr. Smith brings a fruit from the orchard," Ethan murmured. "Or I grab some apples when she isn't looking. But I can't tell anyone, or she'll get mad." The kitchen of the main house was a spacious and cozy environment, with a wood stove, a large solid wood table, and antique cabinets that held the family's porcelain dishes for generations. But for Mary, what stood out the most was the stark contrast between the abundance of the place and how Ethan was treated there. While Victoria enjoyed an elaborate breakfast, imported fruits, special pears ordered from a boutique bakery in Aspen, various fresh juices, the boy had to make do with leftovers or whatever he could find hidden around the property. During the first week, Mary established a careful routine. She woke up at 5:30 in the morning, prepared a strong coffee for herself, and then went to fetch Ethan from the yard. She discovered that he could read with impressive fluency for his age, but pretended otherwise whenever anyone mentioned studies or tutors. "Why do you hide that you can read, Ethan?" she asked one afternoon when she found him secretly leafing through a children's storybook he had found in the house's library. The boy quickly closed the book, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Because when she finds out I can do something, she always finds a way to turn it into punishment," he confessed, looking around to make sure Victoria wasn't nearby. "The last time I showed that I could read, she brought a very angry teacher who yelled at me when I mispronounced a word." Mary began to notice a disturbing pattern. Victoria seemed to have a special talent for turning any joy or achievement of Ethan's into a source of suffering. If the boy showed happiness about something, she quickly found a way to ruin it, always under the pretext of educating and preparing him for the real world. The stepmother had her own routine that seemed meticulously calculated to avoid moments alone with her stepson. Every morning, after the elaborate breakfast, she locked herself in her room for almost 2 hours, claiming to take care of her beauty and fitness. Then, she spent the rest of the morning on the phone, always in conversations that seemed more like negotiations than casual chats. "No, dear, it's still not the right time," Mary heard Victoria say during one of those calls while cleaning the hallway near the office. "I need to make sure everything is legally tied up before we take the next step. The child is a complication, but nothing we can't resolve with patience." Those words chilled Mary's blood. What next step could that be? And why was Ethan considered a complication? The nanny pretended not to have heard anything, but recorded every word in her memory. David Montgomery spent most of his time locked in the office, dealing with the business of the coffee ranch. Through video calls that stretched into the early hours of the morning, Mary noticed that Ethan seemed to be avoiding his own home, as if he sensed that something was wrong but didn't know exactly what to do about it. "Dad is always working," Ethan commented one afternoon while helping Mary hang clothes on the backyard line. "He used to play with me on weekends, but now he says he has too many important things to take care of." "Do you miss playing with him?" Mary asked, observing the boy's melancholic expression. "I do," Ethan admitted, kicking a pebble on the ground. "But she always finds something to do when he wants to be with me. She says there's a party, or a trip, or an important commitment she can't miss." It was at that moment that Mary understood one of Victoria's cruelest tactics. She was systematically isolating father and son, creating constant obstacles to prevent them from having moments of intimacy. It was a subtle strategy, but devastatingly effective. The first truly significant discovery happened by chance, one Thursday afternoon when Mary was organizing Ethan's room. Under the boy's pillow, she found a sketchbook that made her heart break in two. Page after page, Ethan had drawn the same scene. A happy family consisting of a father, a brown-haired mother, who was clearly not Victoria, himself, and in some drawings, an older woman who could be a grandmother. "Ethan, are these drawings yours?" Mary asked gently, showing the sketchbook when the boy returned from the yard. He turned red with embarrassment and tried to grab the sketchbook from her hands. "You can't tell anyone," he pleaded, almost crying. "Please, don't tell. She'll be really mad if she knows I still draw my real mom." "Your real mom," Mary repeated, sensing she was about to discover something important. "Do you remember her?" "A little bit," Ethan whispered, hugging the sketchbook to his chest. "She smelled like vanilla and sang a French song to help me sleep. And she had eyes the color of the coffee with milk that Grandma made." Mary sat on the bed next to the boy, trying to process this information. If Ethan remembered his biological mother, it meant she hadn't died when he was a baby, as everyone seemed to imply. Something very strange had happened to David Montgomery's first wife. "Do you know where your mom is now?" she asked carefully. Ethan shook his head, and a solitary tear rolled down his little face. "She left when I was small. Dad said she didn't want to stay here anymore, but I don't believe it. My mom loved me. I know she did." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Mary stayed awake in her small room at the back of the house, reflecting on everything she had discovered. Her intuition, sharpened by decades of experience, screamed that there was much more to this family's story than met the eye. And at the center of it all was a 5-year-old boy who bore the weight of secrets he didn't even fully understand. The night wind blew strongly through the trees, and Mary made a decision. She would uncover the truth about what had happened to Ethan's mother, even if it cost her job. The third week of Mary's time at the Montgomery Ranch brought a discovery that would completely change her perception of the family's entire story. It was on a Tuesday morning, when a typical mountain storm forced everyone to stay indoors, that she found a crucial clue about the whereabouts of Ethan's biological mother. While organizing the books in the library, a spacious room with hardwood shelves that reached from floor to ceiling, filled with classic works and dusty encyclopedias, Mary noticed that some volumes were out of place, as if someone had recently handled them. Among them, she found a yellowed envelope that had been used as a bookmark, forgotten between the pages of a French novel. The envelope contained a letter dated just 8 months ago, written in French, but with some passages in English. The handwriting was delicate and feminine, and the sender identified herself as Aunt Marie Claire. Mary, who had learned a bit of French when she worked for a family of diplomats in Boston years ago, managed to decipher enough to understand that it was correspondence directed to Ethan. "My dear little Ethan," the letter began, "Aunt Marie Claire thinks of you every day." The letter continued in English. "My dear nephew, your mommy is well and thinks of you every second. Soon you will understand why she had to stay away, but I want you to know that you are very loved. I am sending photos of Paris for you to see the city where your mommy was born." Mary felt her hands tremble. If there was an aunt sending letters to Ethan, it meant that his mother was not only alive, but was keeping in touch with the family. But why were these correspondences hidden in the library instead of being delivered to the boy? The answer to this question came that same day when Mary decided to investigate further. During lunch, while Victoria was on the phone on the porch and David was working in the office, she discreetly asked Mr. Smith, the caretaker, about the boss's first wife. Mrs. Isabel was a very nice French woman, the 60-year-old man said, adjusting his straw hat while watering the hydrangeas in the front garden. He met the boss on a business trip he took to Paris about 8 years ago. She was a language teacher, spoke 4 languages, and had a sweet voice like a singing bird. "And what happened to her?" insisted Mary, pretending to arrange the flowers in the garden. Mr. Smith looked around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "No one talks much about it, but I've been working here for over 20 years and I know a few things," he whispered. Mrs. Isabel started to act strange after the boy was born. Not strange as in sick, no. Strange as in someone who's being pressured, you know? She was always crying in secret, worried about something. "Pressured by whom?" asked Mary, although she already suspected the answer. "Well, at the time, Mrs. Victoria was just a family friend," explained the caretaker, watering a potted plant. "She would come here to visit, saying she wanted to help with the baby. But I noticed that after her visits, Mrs. Isabel became even more nervous." Mary felt her stomach twist. Had Victoria been a friend of the first wife? That would explain how she knew the family's weaknesses so well and how she managed to infiltrate David's life so easily. And how did Mrs. Isabel leave? She questioned. Mr. Smith stopped watering the plants and looked at Mary with eyes filled with sadness. "She didn't leave, Mary. She was sent away," he revealed, his voice heavy with sorrow. "One night, I heard a very ugly argument in the main house. Yelling, crying, doors slamming. The next day, Mrs. Isabel was packing her bags, crying so much it broke my heart. She said she couldn't stay here anymore, that she was hurting everyone, especially the boy." "But that doesn't make sense," protested Mary. "Why would a mother leave her own son?" "Well, Mary, I thought it was strange too," agreed Mr. Smith, shaking his head. "But a few weeks later, I overheard a conversation between the boss and Mrs. Victoria. She said it was the best thing for everyone, that Mrs. Isabel was sick in the head, and that the boy would be better off without his mother around." Mary was starting to piece together a terrible puzzle. If Victoria had manipulated the situation to drive Isabel away, it meant that the entire official version of abandonment was a lie. The Frenchwoman hadn't abandoned her son. She had been forced to leave him behind. That afternoon, when Ethan returned from his daily walk through the apple orchard, Mary decided to approach the subject delicately. "Ethan, do you remember what your mother's voice was like?" she asked as they prepared cheese puffs in the kitchen. The boy's face lit up with a mix of joy and nostalgia. "She sang a song about a little bird that flew far away but always came back to the nest," he said, stirring the dough with concentration. "And when she told stories, it felt like the words danced in the air. Dad said it was because she was French and people from there know how to speak beautifully." "Would you like to receive a letter from your mother?" Mary asked carefully. Ethan's eyes widened with anticipation. "Did she write to me? Where's the letter?" "Not exactly a letter just for you," Mary explained, showing him the correspondence she had found. "But this one is from an aunt who knows your mother. Do you want me to read it to you?" When Mary finished translating the letter, Ethan had tears in his eyes. But for the first time since she arrived at the ranch, they weren't tears of sadness. It was pure hope shining in those brown eyes. "My mom hasn't forgotten me," he whispered, hugging the letter to his chest. "I knew she hadn't forgotten me." "Of course she hasn't forgotten, my angel," Mary confirmed, running her hand through the boy's hair. A real mother never forgets her own child. That night, after Ethan fell asleep holding the letter from his French aunt, Mary made a decision that would change the course of the entire story. She would find a way to contact Isabel and discover the whole truth about what really happened in that family, even if it meant facing Victoria and her sinister plans. The clock in the living room struck midnight, and the mountain wind whispered through the trees as if approving the determination of the brave nanny who had decided to fight for the happiness of an innocent child. The fourth week brought an unexpected opportunity for Mary to advance in her silent investigation. Victoria had traveled to Chicago on business, or at least that's what she said, leaving behind a noticeably lighter atmosphere at the ranch. Ethan, who usually walked around the house with tense shoulders and a watchful gaze, was finally able to relax and be a child. "Mary, can I have breakfast at the big table today?" the boy asked one Thursday morning, referring to the dining table in the main room, where usually only Victoria and David had their meals. "Of course you can, my angel," Mary replied, smiling at the sparkle of joy in the child's eyes. "How about we prepare a special breakfast? I can make those cheese puffs you love so much." It was incredible how the simple absence of the stepmother completely transformed the dynamics of the house. David, who had left early to visit a neighboring property where he was negotiating the purchase of new equipment for coffee processing, had instructed Mary to take care of everything related to Ethan during his absence. It was while organizing David's office, he had asked her to help keep the papers in order while he was away, that Mary came across information that deeply disturbed her. The laptop had been left open on the solid cedar table, and when she moved it to clean the surface, the screen lit up automatically. "Mary." Joanna had no intention of snooping, but what appeared on the screen was impossible to ignore. The email was open, showing a conversation between Victoria and a lawyer from Chicago. The first lines jumped out at her like a punch to the stomach. "Dr. Ricardo, as we discussed, I need to expedite the adoption process for the minor Ethan Montgomery. The father is becoming increasingly attached to the child, and this could complicate our future plans. As we discussed, once the adoption is formalized, I will have legal rights over the child and, consequently, over his inheritance in the event of the current guardian's passing." Joanna felt her legs weaken. Adoption? Inheritance? What sinister plans were these? She continued reading, even knowing she was invading someone else's privacy, justifying to herself that it was for Ethan's safety. The lawyer's response was even more disturbing. "Mrs. Victoria, as I have explained before, the adoption process requires the consent of the biological father, who must be fully aware of the legal implications. Additionally, there is the issue of the biological mother. Our records indicate that Isabel Montgomery never officially renounced her maternal rights. It would be necessary to locate her to formalize the renunciation or prove definitive abandonment." Joanna's heart raced. Isabel Montgomery. Now she knew the full name of Ethan's mother. And more importantly, the woman had never legally renounced her rights over her son. This meant that, technically, she was still the child's legal mother. Joanna quickly grabbed a piece of paper and noted down the lawyer's full name and email address before discreetly closing the computer. Her hands trembled as she tucked the paper into her apron pocket. She was dealing with something far more serious than she had initially imagined. "Ethan, are you okay?" asked Ethan, appearing at the office door. "You look scared." "I'm fine, sweetheart," she lied, forcing a smile. "I was just thinking about what we should make for lunch. How about we prepare a surprise for your dad when he gets back?" During lunch, while they prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and fresh apple juice, Joanna decided to probe Ethan about what he knew regarding Victoria's plans. "Ethan, have you heard your stepmother talking about adoption?" she asked carefully, pretending to focus on cutting the tomatoes. The boy stopped chewing and looked at her with a confused expression. "Adoption is when someone becomes the child of another person, right?" he asked. "Once she talked on the phone about it, but I didn't really understand. She said it would be better for everyone if I became her real son." Joanna felt her stomach churn. The child didn't even comprehend the implications of what was being plotted against him. "And what do you think about that idea?" she inquired. Ethan made a disgusted face. "I don't want to be her son," he declared firmly. "I already have a mom, even if she's far away. And I have dad too. Why would I need another mom?" The innocence of his response broke Joanna's heart. Ethan had no idea that Victoria was scheming not only to become his legal mother, but possibly to gain access to an inheritance that could be substantial, considering the Montgomerys were a traditional and prosperous family in the region. That afternoon, while Ethan napped in his favorite hammock under the century-old apple tree in the yard, Joanna made a risky decision. Using the house phone, an old landline that sat in the kitchen, she called a friend who worked as a secretary at a law firm in Denver. "Carmum, I need a favor," Joanna said quietly, always keeping an eye on the door to ensure no one was listening. "Do you know any lawyers who work with family law? It's a delicate situation involving a child." "I do know one, Joanna," Carmum replied. "Why? Are you having a problem?" "It's not me. It's a situation I witnessed at my current job," Joanna explained carefully. "I suspect a child is being legally harmed, and I need to know the best way to protect him." Carmum gave her the contact information of a lawyer specializing in children's rights, and Joanna noted down all the details. She knew she was wading into dangerous waters, but she couldn't stand by and watch Ethan being manipulated like that. When David returned late in the afternoon, he found the house in a harmony he hadn't seen in months. Ethan was helping Joanna prepare a cornmeal cake in the kitchen, humming a song he had learned from the nanny. The smile on the boy's face was genuine, with no trace of the constant fear he carried when Victoria was present. "It's great to see you both like this," David commented, hugging his son and nodding at Joanna. "I haven't seen Ethan so cheerful in a long time." "Dad, Joanna taught me how to make cake," Ethan exclaimed proudly, showing his hands covered in batter. "And she said my French mom also knew how to cook very well." Joanna noticed how David's expression immediately closed off upon hearing the mention of his first wife. He looked at the nanny with a mix of gratitude and concern. "Mrs. Joanna, may I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, indicating the porch. On the porch, with the sun setting behind the mountains, David showed vulnerability for the first time since Joanna's arrival. "I know you must be wondering about Ethan's mother," he began, running his hands through his graying hair. "It's a complicated situation, and I'm not proud of how I handled everything back then." "Mr. David, you don't need to explain anything to me," Joanna replied diplomatically. "I just want the best for the boy." "I know it is," he sighed. "That's why I will be honest with you. Isabel didn't abandon Ethan out of bad character. She was going through a very difficult time, and I thought it would be better for everyone if she stepped away temporarily." Temporarily. The word echoed in Mary's mind like an alarm bell. If the separation was meant to be temporary, why had Isabel never returned? And why did Ethan believe that his mother had abandoned him for good? "And what about Victoria? Did she know your first wife?" Mary asked, pretending to be casually curious. David hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told Mary more than any words could. "They were acquainted," he finally admitted. "Victoria was very helpful during that difficult time. In fact, she was the one who helped me understand that it would be better for Ethan if Isabel stepped away." There it was. The confession Mary needed. Victoria had manipulated the situation from the start, convincing David that it would be better to remove Isabel from her own son's life. And now she was scheming to become Ethan's legal mother, probably to gain access to the family's assets. But Mary still didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. What she would discover next would change everything. The 5th week of Mary's stay at the Montgomery Ranch brought a twist that no one could have predicted. It was on a Sunday morning, when Victoria had gone out for another of her business trips, this time to Aspen, that Mary decided to take the riskiest step in her investigation, to attempt direct contact with Claire. Using the information she had carefully gathered over the previous weeks, including the address from the letter found in the library and some details Ethan had mentioned about his French aunt, Mary managed to locate an international phone number through an operator. Her hands trembled as she dialed the digits, aware that this call could forever change the fate of that family. "Hello?" A feminine voice on the other end answered, with an unmistakable French accent. "Good afternoon," Mary began in English, unsure if she would be understood. "I am calling from the United States, looking for Claire, sister of Isabel Montgomery." There was a tense silence on the other end, followed by a response in perfect English, though laden with emotion. "My God. Are you calling about my nephew Ethan? How did you get my number? Is Isabel okay? Please tell me she is okay." The desperation in Claire's voice made Mary's heart ache. It was evident that the French aunt had not heard from her sister and nephew in a long time. "I am Mary, Ethan's nanny," she explained carefully. "I found a letter of yours hidden in the library of the house where I work. I need to talk to you about a very delicate situation involving the boy." "Hidden? What do you mean hidden?" Claire asked, her voice filled with indignation. "I have been sending letters and gifts to Ethan for over a year. I always receive responses that he doesn't want contact with us, that he is well adjusted to his new life. You told me he doesn't even remember his mother." Mary felt the ground open beneath her feet. Someone was intercepting correspondence from France and lying to Isabel's family, making them believe that Ethan rejected contact with his mother and maternal relatives. "Mrs. Claire, that is a lie," Mary said firmly. "Ethan remembers his mother perfectly and speaks of her with great love. He has never received any letters or gifts. Someone is intercepting everything before it reaches him." The sobbing that came from the other end of the line was heartbreaking. Claire cried for a few minutes before she could compose herself to continue the conversation. "I knew something was wrong," she sobbed. "Isabel would never voluntarily abandon Ethan. She may have had postpartum depression, she may have felt lost and confused, but she would never leave her own son unless she was forced to." "Can you tell me what really happened?" Mary asked. "I need to understand the situation to help the boy." Claire took a deep breath before beginning to recount a story that left Mary in shock. Isabel met David at a sustainable agriculture conference in Paris 8 years ago. She was working as a translator at the event, speaking English fluently because she had done her master's degree in the United States. It was love at first sight for both of them. David was a widower, kind, successful, and Isabel was enchanted by the idea of living on a ranch in the countryside of the United States. "And how was their life here?" Mary questioned. "The first years were wonderful, according to the letters Isabel wrote to me," Claire continued. "She loved rural life, learned to cook American dishes, helped manage the ranch using her language skills for international negotiations. When Ethan was born, she was over the moon with happiness." "So what changed?" Mary pressed. "Victoria," Claire said, pronouncing the name with evident disgust. "Isabel started writing to me about this woman about 2 years after Ethan was born. At first, she seemed just like a caring friend, always offering to help with the baby, giving advice on motherhood, those things. The story unfolding was even more sinister than Mary had imagined. But gradually," Claire continued, "Isabel realized that Victoria was systematically undermining her confidence. She made subtle comments about how Isabel was different after motherhood, how she might not be emotionally prepared to raise a child away from her own family. She suggested that it might be better for Ethan to have a more stable and American maternal figure." "And how did that affect your sister?" "Isabel began to develop severe anxiety," Claire explained, her voice heavy with pain. "She doubted every decision she made regarding Ethan. Victoria always had a constructive criticism, always made Isabel feel inadequate. When Ethan cried, Victoria insinuated it was because Isabel didn't know how to comfort him. When he fell ill, she suggested that Isabel wasn't taking care of his nutrition properly." Mary was painting a terrifying picture of psychological manipulation. Victoria had used gaslighting techniques to make Isabel believe she was an incompetent mother. "And what about Mr. David? Didn't he notice what was happening?" "David was being manipulated too," Claire sighed. "Victoria was very clever. She subtly planted doubts in his mind. She said she was worried about Isabel, that maybe she needed professional help, that it wasn't normal for a mother to have so many difficulties adapting to motherhood." "And how did it all end?" "One day, Isabel called me crying desperately," Claire recounted, her voice breaking again. "She said David had agreed it would be better for her to return to France, temporarily, to treat her depression. Victoria had convinced both of them that it would be best for Ethan to stay away from his unstable mother for a while. But she never returned. Every time Isabel tried to come back, Victoria found a new excuse," Claire explained, the anger rising in her voice. "Sometimes saying Ethan was better off without her, other times claiming he had developed traumas and would be harmed by his mother's return. And David, poor thing, believed everything because Victoria always presented arguments that seemed logical and well-intentioned." Mary's hands trembled so much she could barely hold the phone. "Mrs. Claire, where is Isabel now?" "She lives with me in Lyon," the Frenchwoman replied. "She works as a Portuguese teacher at a language school. She is physically well, but her heart is broken. She dreams every night of Ethan, blames herself for agreeing to stay away, even if temporarily. She has never forgiven herself for abandoning her own son. She never abandoned him, Mary declared firmly. She was deceived, manipulated, and kept away from her own son by a ruthless woman who had sinister plans from the start. It was at that moment that Mary told Claire about Victoria's adoption plans, about the emails she had read, and about Ethan's current situation on the ranch. The Frenchwoman listened in growing silence. "That monster is trying to steal my nephew," Claire exclaimed when Mary finished. "This is emotional kidnapping and legal manipulation. We need to act immediately." "But how?" Mary asked. "I'm just a nanny. I have no legal power over anything." "You have something much more powerful than legal power," Claire declared with determination. "You have the truth. And the truth always finds a way to win, especially when there's someone brave enough to fight for it." At that moment, hearing the conviction in the voice of that woman across the ocean, Mary knew she was no longer alone in this battle, and that together they would find a way to reunite Ethan with his true family. What she didn't yet know was that Victoria was about to accelerate her plans in an even more dangerous way. Victoria's return the following Monday brought a storm that had nothing to do with the weather in the mountains. Mary immediately noticed that something had changed in the stepmother's demeanor. She seemed more confident, more determined, and there was a calculating glint in her eyes that did not bode well for Ethan. "Mary, I need to talk to you," Victoria announced as soon as she stepped into the house, her designer bag still in the trunk of the imported car. She wore a beige linen suit that cost more than Mary's monthly salary, and her blonde hair was impeccably styled, as if she had just come from a salon. "Yes, ma'am," Mary replied, keeping her tone respectful while internally preparing for what was to come. "I had a very productive conversation with some specialists in Chicago," Victoria declared, removing her sunglasses and staring at Mary intently. "About Ethan's situation. It seems he needs more specialized care." The words froze Mary's blood. Specialized care sounded like a euphemism for something very sinister. "What do you mean, Mrs. Victoria?" "The boy is fine, playing out in the yard with the ducklings," Mary said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Ah, but that's exactly the problem," Victoria replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A 5-year-old shouldn't always be hiding among animals. That's not normal behavior, Mary. The psychologists I consulted were very clear about this." Mary felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Victoria had consulted psychologists? For what? "Are you saying Ethan needs psychological support?" she asked cautiously. "Not just support," Victoria corrected, adjusting an imaginary strand of hair. "Intensive treatment. Perhaps even temporary hospitalization in a specialized clinic for children traumatized by maternal abandonment." The word hospitalization hit Mary like a lightning bolt. Was Victoria planning to institutionalize Ethan? Based on what? The fact that the child was shy and liked to play with animals? "Mrs. Victoria, with all due respect, Ethan shows no behavior that justifies hospitalization," Mary argued, struggling to remain calm. "He's just a reserved child who has gone through some difficult changes." "Mary, I know you've grown fond of the boy," Victoria said, her condescending tone cutting like a blade. "But you don't have the training to assess complex psychological issues. I, on the other hand, have consulted the best specialists in Chicago. Dr. Michael Smith, for example, is considered an authority on childhood trauma." Mary recognized that name somewhere, but he couldn't remember where. What he knew for sure was that Ethan was a perfectly normal child, just deprived of the maternal affection that had been cruelly denied to him. "And does Mr. David know about this consultation?" Mary asked. "David is very busy with the ranch business," Victoria replied evasively. "But I'm sure he will agree once I present all the professional evidence. After all, he only wants what's best for his son." At that moment, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his little eyes immediately filling with apprehension upon seeing Victoria. The boy had developed a sixth sense for detecting when his stepmother was plotting something against him. "Hi, Daddy," he murmured softly, using an expression he had learned from Mary. "Ethan, dear," Victoria said with a forced sweetness that made Mary's stomach churn. "I'm so glad you're here. We have some very good news to share." The boy hid behind Mary, clutching tightly to the nanny's apron. "What news?" he asked with a trembling voice. "We're going on a very special trip to Chicago," Victoria announced, bending down to the child's level. You will meet some very important doctors who will help you feel better. I'm not sick, protested Ethan, his voice rising in pitch with fear. I don't want to go to Chicago. I want to stay here with Mary and the ducklings. See, Victoria said, standing up and looking at Mary as if that reaction confirmed her suspicions. Clearly altered behavior. A normal child would be excited about a trip, not filled with this irrational fear of change. Mary had to hold herself back from exploding. Ethan's fear was not irrational. It was a perfectly logical response from a child who had learned to associate Victoria's plans with suffering and separation. When would this trip be? She asked, trying to buy time to think of a way to prevent this madness. Tomorrow, Victoria replied with evident satisfaction. I've already scheduled the appointment with Dr. Michael for Wednesday. If all goes as planned, Ethan might stay at the clinic for a few weeks for intensive evaluation. A few weeks. Mary understood with horror that Victoria was trying to take Ethan away from the ranch just as she was about to be exposed. If the boy were hospitalized, she would completely lose access to him, and Victoria would have time to manipulate the situation even further. Mrs. Victoria, I think it would be wise for Mr. David to be involved in these decisions, Mary suggested diplomatically. After all, he is the child's father. Of course he will be involved, Victoria replied, but there was something evasive in her tone. Actually, David had to travel urgently to Vermont to resolve an issue with equipment suppliers. He won't be back until Friday. That's why I need to take the initiative and ensure Ethan's well-being. Too convenient. Mary immediately suspected that David's sudden trip was no coincidence. Victoria had orchestrated everything to have a clear field to execute her plans. That night, after Victoria retired to her room, and Ethan finally managed to fall asleep after crying for over an hour out of fear of the trip to Chicago, Mary made a desperate decision. Using the kitchen phone, she called Claire again. Claire, I urgently need your help, she whispered into the phone. Victoria wants to admit Ethan to a psychiatric clinic tomorrow. She's saying it's for trauma treatment, but I know it's to get him away before the truth comes out. Mon Dieu, that woman is a demon, Claire exclaimed. Wait, I'll put Isabel on the line. She needs to hear this directly. A few minutes later, a voice that Mary immediately recognized from Ethan's descriptions echoed through the line. Hello? This is Isabel. Are you my son's nanny? Mary's heart raced. She was finally speaking with Ethan's real mother. Yes, I'm Mary. Mrs. Isabel, your boy is in danger. This woman wants to admit him to a psychiatric clinic to gain total control over him. The sobbing from the other end of the line was heartbreaking. My baby, my little Ethan. Isabel sobbed. I knew this would happen. I always knew she had sinister plans. That's why I fought so hard not to leave the United States, but they convinced me that I was harming my own child with my instability. Mrs. Isabel, you were never unstable, Mary declared firmly. You were a victim of cruel and calculated manipulation, and now your son needs your help. But what can I do from here in France? Isabel asked, evident desperation in her voice. First, I need you to send me all the documents you have proving that you never renounced your maternal rights, Mary explained. Second, I will need you to confirm some information about the time you were forced to leave the United States. And third, I need you to be prepared to return immediately if necessary. I'll take the first available flight, Isabel declared without hesitation. I should have done this a long time ago. My son needs me, and I won't fail him again. Mary hung up the phone with her heart racing. She had less than 12 hours to prevent Victoria from taking Ethan to Chicago, and she knew that if she failed, she might never be able to protect that innocent child from her stepmother's diabolical plans. The early morning promised to be very long. The fateful morning began at 5 o'clock, when Mary woke up to the sound of unusual movement coming from the main part of the house. Through the window of her small room in the back, she could see lights on in the upstairs and shadows moving through the hallways. Victoria was up to something. Mary was preparing to leave much earlier than she had announced. She quickly dressed and slipped out the back door, walking discreetly to Ethan's bedroom window. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw Victoria packing a suitcase with the boy's clothes while he was still sound asleep in his bed. Ethan, wake up, dear, Victoria whispered with a false sweetness that sent chills down Mary's spine. We have to leave early to make it to Chicago on time. The boy slowly opened his eyes, and Mary could see through the window the look of confusion and fear that settled on his little face as he understood what was happening. "But you said we were traveling in the afternoon," Ethan murmured, still groggy. "Where's Mary? I want Mary." "Mary isn't coming with us this time," Victoria replied, closing the suitcase with sharp movements. "This is a trip just for us, to sort out important things about your future." Ethan began to cry, a soft but desperate whimper that pierced Mary's heart like a dagger. She knew she needed to act immediately, but she also knew she had to be smart. Confronting Victoria directly at that moment would only result in chaos that could further harm Ethan. Quickly returning to her room, Mary grabbed the simple cell phone she rarely used, a vintage model that worked perfectly, and dialed the number she had noted down from the child rights attorney her friend Carmen had recommended. "Dr. Michael? I'm sorry to call so early, but I have an emergency involving a child at risk," she whispered into the phone. "Who is speaking?" a sleepy voice on the other end asked. "Mary Johnson. Carmen Rivera gave me your contact. Doctor, a 5-year-old child is being taken against his will for unnecessary psychiatric hospitalization. The person responsible is not the biological mother and is acting without the father's knowledge. What can I do?" There was a pause before the attorney responded, now with a more alert voice. "This is very serious. If you have evidence that this is a risk situation for the child, you can contact Child Protective Services immediately. They have the authority to intervene in emergency cases. But it's the middle of the night. How am I going to find someone from Child Protective Services now? There is an emergency hotline. I'll give you the number. And Ms. Johnson, if this child is truly in danger, you have a moral and legal obligation to protect him, even if it means disobeying the orders of those responsible." As Mary wrote down the hotline number, she heard the sound of Victoria's car engine starting in the garage. She was taking Ethan away at that very moment. Without thinking twice, Mary ran to the garage, arriving just in time to see Victoria putting Ethan, still in his pajamas and barefoot, into the back seat of the car. The boy was crying profusely and shouting for his nanny. "Mary! Mary, help me! I don't want to go!" Ethan shouted upon seeing her, reaching out his little arms toward her. "Mrs. Victoria, stop!" Mary yelled, running toward the car. "You can't take the boy like this, against his will." "Mary, you are crossing all the lines," Victoria retorted, shutting the car door with Ethan inside. "I'm his stepmother, and I have full authority to make decisions about his well-being. Not without his father's permission," Mary insisted, positioning herself in front of the car to prevent Victoria from leaving. "And not in the middle of the night, as if you were running away. Get out of the way, or I will call the police," Victoria threatened, but Mary could see the nervousness in her eyes. She knew she was acting wrong, and that's why she wanted to leave quickly before anyone could intervene. "Call the police then," Mary replied bravely. "I want to see you explain to the officers why you are taking a child against his will on an unauthorized trip." At that moment, Mr. Smith came running, drawn by the shouting. The caretaker, who had witnessed many strange situations in that house over the years, immediately realized that something was very wrong. "What's all this noise?" he asked, looking alternately at Mary in front of the car and at Ethan crying in the back seat. "Mr. Smith, she's trying to sneak Ethan away to Chicago," Mary quickly explained, without notifying the father, in the middle of the night, and the boy is terrified. The caretaker, who had grandchildren the same age as Ethan and knew how to recognize when a child was in real danger, stood beside Mary. "Mrs. Victoria, with all due respect, but this isn't right," he said firmly. "A child doesn't travel crying like that. And the boss always informs me when there's going to be a trip with the boy. You're both fired," Victoria shouted, completely losing her composure. "Get out of the way now, or I will run you over." But the threat only strengthened Mary's determination. She realized that Victoria was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. It was the opportunity she needed. "Ethan, my angel, do you want to go on this trip?" Mary asked loud enough for everyone to hear. "And no," the boy shouted through the closed window. "I want to stay here. I want my daddy. I don't want to go with her." "See," Mary said, looking directly at Victoria. "He doesn't want to go, and a real stepmother would never force a traumatized child to do something he doesn't want." It was at that moment that Victoria made the fatal mistake. Storming out of the car in a fit of rage, she shouted, "This child will do what I say. I am the one who decides what's best for him, not you." And when I get the official adoption, no one will be able to question my decisions. Decisions. Done. There was the confession that Mary needed, and in front of a witness. Adoption, Mr. Smith repeated, frowning. But the boy already has a father and mother. Why do you want to adopt him? Victoria realized she had said too much and tried to backtrack. I meant to say, it's just a legal formality, but it was too late. Ethan had managed to open the car door from the inside and ran into Mary's arms, trembling with fear and relief. Mary, don't let her take me, the boy pleaded, clinging to the nanny as if she were his only salvation. Please, don't let her. I won't let you go, my angel, Mary promised, hugging him protectively. No one is going to take you where you don't want to go. Victoria, seeing that she had lost control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. Very well. You will regret this. I'm calling my lawyer and the police right now. You are kidnapping my child. Your child? Mary questioned, raising an eyebrow. As far as I know, Ethan has a father and mother. You are just the stepmother, with no legal rights over him. It was at that moment that Victoria's phone rang. She answered angrily, but her expression changed drastically as the conversation continued. What? How did you get to the United States? That's impossible, she shouted into the phone, her face visibly paling. Mary and Mr. Smith exchanged intrigued glances. Who had arrived in the United States that left Victoria so distraught? The answer would come in a few hours and change the fate of that family forever. The call Victoria received in the early morning was from her accomplice lawyer in Chicago, Dr. Paul, bringing news that sent her into a total panic. Isabel Montgomery had landed at O'Hare Airport the night before, accompanied by a lawyer specializing in international law and armed with all the necessary documentation to prove her maternal rights over Ethan. This is impossible. Victoria screamed into the phone, pacing nervously through the main room of the house, while Mary kept Ethan safe in her arms. She doesn't have money to travel. How did she get a lawyer? The answer was simple, though Victoria did not know. Claire had used all her savings and sold some family jewelry to fund her sister's urgent trip. The love of a true family had found resources where it seemed impossible. Throughout the morning, Victoria made desperate calls, trying to expedite her legal plans, but it was too late. Her carefully laid schemes began to crumble like a house of cards soaked by the approaching storm. Mary, Mr. Smith said, discreetly approaching the nanny who was still comforting Ethan in the kitchen. There's a French lady at the gate asking for the boy. She said she's his mother. Mary's heart raced. Isabel had arrived. Ethan, my angel, she said softly, kneeling to the boy's height. There's a very special visitor for you. Someone who came from very far because they love you very much. Ethan's little eyes widened with a mix of expectation and fear. Is it the police? Is it those doctors she wanted to take me to? He asked with a trembling voice. No, my love, Mary replied, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. It's someone you know, but you haven't seen in a long time. Someone who sings French songs and smells like vanilla. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, processing Mary's words. Slowly, his eyes filled with a light that hadn't appeared in months. My mom, he whispered, as if afraid to speak too loudly and break a dream. Your mom, Mary confirmed, holding the boy's small trembling hands. When they reached the gate of the property, the scene that unfolded was both heartbreaking and healing. Isabel Montgomery was there, thinner than in the photos Ethan kept in his memory, with her brown hair now cut shorter, but with the same coffee and milk-colored eyes he had inherited. She wore a simple navy blue dress, carried a small suitcase, and held a bouquet of jasmine, the same flower whose scent Ethan could still remember from his childhood. Beside her was a man in a discreet suit who identified himself as Dr. Paul Miller, a family law specialist. Mon petit prince, Isabel murmured in French when she saw her son, her legs almost giving way from emotion. Ethan stood still for a few seconds, as if needing to be sure he wasn't dreaming. Then, in an impulse that seemed to come from a deep place in his memory, he ran toward his mother and threw himself into her arms. Mom, you're back, he shouted, mixing English and French in a way that revealed how deep the roots of his first language were. Isabel picked him up and spun around with him, both crying with joy and relief. The familiar scent of vanilla enveloped Ethan like a blanket of happy memories he thought he had lost forever. I'm so sorry, my love, I'm so very sorry, Isabel repeated, covering her son's little face with kisses. Mommy never wanted to leave you. Never, ever wanted to leave you. I knew you hadn't forgotten me, Ethan exclaimed, clinging to his mother's neck with all the strength of his little arms. I drew you every day. I saved all the drawings. Mary watched the scene with tears streaming freely down her face, feeling that all the risks she had taken, all the sleepless nights worrying about that boy, everything had been worth it to witness that moment of reunion. It was then that Victoria appeared at the gate like an uncontrolled fury. How dare you step foot on this property? She shouted at Isabel. Her face twisted with rage. You abandoned this child. You have no rights over her. Isabel slowly stood up, still holding Ethan in her arms, and looked at Victoria with a dignity that brutally contrasted with the other woman's despair. I never abandoned my son, Isabel declared in perfect English, her voice steady despite the tears. I was manipulated, deceived, and forced to stay away from him by you. But that ends today. You're crazy, unstable. Everyone knows that. Victoria screamed, completely losing her composure. David even said you weren't ready to be a mother. David said that because you planted those ideas in his head. Isabel replied, her voice gaining strength. Just like you tried to convince me that I was an inadequate mother. But I am no longer that confused and manipulated woman who left here 3 years ago. I know exactly who you are and what you did. Dr. Paul Miller stepped forward, pulling some documents from his leather briefcase. Ms. Victoria, I presume, he said politely. I am Dr. Paul Miller, Ms. Isabel's attorney. I have here all the documentation proving that my client never legally renounced her maternal rights over her son. Any attempt at adoption without her consent is illegal. Victoria visibly paled. This can't be happening, she murmured, finally seeming to understand that her plans had completely fallen apart. Where is David? Isabel asked, looking around. I need to talk to him. He traveled, Victoria stammered. He's in Vermont until Friday. How convenient, Dr. Paul commented ironically. Just when you planned to take the child to Chicago without paternal authorization. Joanna stepped forward, feeling it was time to reveal everything she knew. Mr. Attorney, I have important information about Ms. Victoria's plans, she said bravely. I saw emails about forced adoption, unnecessary psychiatric hospitalization attempts, and interception of correspondence from the maternal French family. You, Victoria shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Joanna. You planned all of this. You brought this woman here. I only protected an innocent child, Joanna replied with dignity. I did what any decent person would do upon discovering that a boy was being harmed. Ethan, who had been watching the entire discussion nestled in his mother's secure arms, finally spoke. Mom, can I stay with you now? Forever, he asked in a small voice filled with hope. Yes, my love, Isabel replied, kissing her son's forehead. Mommy will never leave you again. Never. And at that moment, with the afternoon sun illuminating the scene and the scent of jasmine filling the air, a family finally began to heal from the wounds that manipulation and greed had caused. But the final battle was yet to come when David returned and discovered the whole truth. David Montgomery's unexpected return on Wednesday night created the final confrontation that would determine the fate of the entire family. He had received a desperate call from Victoria telling a distorted version of events and rushed back from Vermont without fully understanding what was happening in his own home. When he parked the car in the garage and saw an unfamiliar woman playing with Ethan in the yard, his first impulse was confusion. But when she turned and he recognized Isabel's face, more mature but still with the same sweet eyes that had captivated him in Paris, his legs almost gave way. Isabel, he murmured, as if seeing a ghost. Hello, David, she replied calmly, rising from the grass where she had been teaching Ethan to make daisy chains. We need to talk. Ethan ran to his father with the same naturalness as always, but now carrying a joy that David hadn't seen in years. Daddy, my mom is back, the boy exclaimed, radiant. She taught me a new song, and she said she's going to stay forever. David looked alternately at his radiant son and his ex-wife, trying to process the situation. At that moment, Victoria appeared on the porch, her eyes red from crying, revealing hours of despair. David, thank God you're back, she exclaimed dramatically. This woman showed up here and is trying to kidnap Ethan. She's disturbed, saying horrible lies about me. Lies. Isabel repeated, her voice remaining calm despite the provocation. Like the fact that you intercepted all the letters I sent to my son over the last 3 years? Or that you plotted my forced hospitalization to keep me away from him? Dr. Paul Miller, who had discreetly remained on the porch during the reunion between mother and son, approached with his folder of documents. Mr. Montgomery, I am Dr. Paul Miller, Ms. Isabel's attorney. He formally introduced himself. I have serious evidence regarding manipulation, interception of correspondence, and attempted illegal appropriation of a minor. David appeared to be in shock, looking back and forth as if trying to understand a very complex puzzle. Wait, everyone stop, he said, running his hands through his hair. Can someone explain to me what the hell is going on here? Isabel, you disappeared 3 years ago. You said you couldn't be a mother anymore, that you were sick. I never said that, Isabel replied firmly. I said I was confused and needed help. But I was convinced it would be better for Ethan if I stayed away temporarily. And every time I tried to come back, I was told he was better off without me. Joanna, who had been observing everything from a respectful distance, decided it was time to reveal the whole truth. She approached the group carrying an improvised folder where she had kept all the evidence she had collected over the previous weeks. Mr. David, excuse me, she said respectfully. But David needed to know some things I discovered. His wife was planning to take Ethan to Chicago this morning without his consent to admit him to a psychiatric clinic. What? David exclaimed, looking at Victoria with disbelief. Is that true? I just wanted what was best for him. Victoria stammered, realizing her excuses sounded too weak. The doctors said he needed specialized treatment. Which doctors? Dr. Paul questioned. We have documents showing that you consulted only one professional, Dr. Michael Smith, who has a questionable history of exaggerated diagnoses for payment. Mary opened her folder and showed the notes she had made over the weeks. Mr. David, I also discovered that Mrs. Victoria was plotting a forced adoption. I saw emails between her and a lawyer discussing how to access Ethan's inheritance in case you were to pass away. The color drained completely from David's face. He looked at Victoria as if he were seeing her for the first time. Victoria, is this true? He asked, his voice heavy with deep pain. David, dear, they are twisting everything. Victoria cried, trying to approach him. I just wanted to formalize my position as Ethan's mother. There's nothing wrong with that. There is when it's done in secret and for financial gain. Dr. Paul interrupted, showing copies of the emails that Isabel had obtained through her own legal contacts. And it's very wrong when you intercept family correspondence and lie to a child about their own mother. Isabel stepped closer to David, her eyes shining with held-back tears. David, did you really believe I would abandon our son? She asked with a broken voice. You knew me, lived with me, saw how I loved Ethan. How could you believe I would just stop loving him? The question hit David like a punch to the stomach. For the first time in 3 years, he could see clearly what had happened. The doubts that Victoria had planted in his mind, the subtle suggestions that Isabel was unstable, the way she always had a logical explanation for every strange behavior of his wife. My God, he murmured, covering his face with his hands. What have I done? How could I have been so blind? Ethan, sensing his father's anguish, approached and took his hand. Dad, you didn't know? The boy said with impressive wisdom for his 5 years. She fooled everyone. But now my mom is back, and we can be a family again. David knelt before his son, tears streaming freely down his face. Ethan, can you forgive me? Dad made a huge mistake. I let someone keep your mom away from you, and that was the most wrong thing I've ever done in my life. I forgive you, Dad, Ethan said, hugging his father. But you have to apologize to Mom too, and promise you'll never let her go again. David stood up and looked at Isabel, regret etched in every line of his face. Isabel, I don't have the words to express how sorry I am, he said, his voice choked. I was an idiot, a coward, and I let our family be destroyed by this, he said, looking at Victoria with a mix of disgust and disbelief. David, our marriage ended the moment you chose to believe her instead of trusting the love we built together, Isabel replied, maintaining her dignity. But I didn't come here to win you back. I came to reclaim my place in my son's life. Victoria, realizing she had completely lost, made one last desperate attempt. You can't do this to me. I dedicated 3 years of my life to this family. I have rights. You have the right to pack your bags and leave my property immediately, David declared with a firmness he hadn't shown in years. And if you try anything against my son or his mother, I will sue you for all the crimes you've committed here. Dr. Paul stepped forward, pulling an official document from his folder. In fact, we have already filed a report with the public prosecutor's office for interception of correspondence, attempted illegal appropriation of a minor, and document forgery. You can expect a summons in the coming days. Victoria looked around, finally realizing she had lost everything. Without another word, she went upstairs to pack her things, her era of manipulation and lies coming to an end. Meanwhile, on the porch of the house that was finally becoming a home again, Ethan nestled between his parents, and Mary watched from afar with a heart full of gratitude for having been the instrument that brought the truth to light. Justice had triumphed, and a family was coming together again. 6 months after those tumultuous days, the Montgomery Ranch had completely transformed. What was once a house filled with tension and poorly kept secrets now breathed the harmony of a family that had learned to value true love above any social convention or material interest. Isabel had decided to stay in the United States permanently, not to rekindle her marriage with David, because some wounds were too deep for a complete romantic reconciliation, but to build a new family dynamic based on mutual respect and Ethan's well-being. They had reached a civilized agreement. She would live in the former caretaker's house, which David had completely renovated, creating a cozy space where mother and son could spend time together every day. "Mom, look what I planted," Ethan exclaimed one sunny December morning, running through the garden that was now flourishing under Isabel's loving care. The French lavender beds she had planted exuded a delightful fragrance. Ethan was completely transformed at the age of 6. The shy and haunted boy who once hid among the ducks had given way to a confident, bilingual child who spoke French and English with equal fluency and radiated the security of being deeply loved by both parents. "Your carrots are looking beautiful, my little gardener," Mrs. Isabel replied, hugging her son and admiring the small garden he had created with her help and Mr. Smith. "Shall we pick some to make that soup you love so much?" The family routine had established itself naturally and harmoniously. Ethan spent his mornings with David, learning about the ranch and the family business. After all, he was the legitimate heir to a century-old tradition of coffee cultivation. Afternoons were dedicated to activities with Isabel, French lessons, cooking, gardening, and the famous story sessions that always ended with French songs that lulled the boy into his afternoon nap. David had changed profoundly as a person. The traumatic experience of almost losing his son to Victoria's schemes had made him completely rethink his priorities and how he viewed relationships. He now spent much more time with Ethan, drastically reduced his business trips, and developed a genuine respect for Isabel, which grew each day. "Isabel, I want to thank you again for agreeing to stay," he said one afternoon while watching Ethan play with the new ducklings that had hatched in the spring. "I know I don't deserve your generosity after everything that happened." "David, the past is the past," she replied serenely, adjusting a strand of her brown hair, which she now wore longer, just like in the days when they were happy together. "What matters is that we have managed to build something good for our son. He needs both parents, and we found a way to give that to him." Isabel's presence at the ranch had also brought significant practical changes. She used her language skills to help David expand coffee exports to European markets, translating contracts, and serving as a cultural bridge in negotiations. The Montgomery Ranch now exported specialty coffee to France, Switzerland, and Belgium, becoming one of the most prosperous properties in the region. Mary had remained with the family, but her role had naturally evolved. She was no longer just Ethan's nanny. She was considered part of the family, an adopted grandma whom everyone respected and loved. Her courage in protecting Ethan during the most difficult times had created an eternal bond with the Montgomery family. "Mrs. Mary, you saved our family," Isabel often said, always emotional when remembering everything the nanny had risked for the love of a child she barely knew. "I just did what anyone with a heart would do," Mary modestly replied, but her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched Ethan grow happy and secure. The nanny now managed the general administration of the house, cooked family meals, combining traditional Vermont recipes with French dishes that Isabel had taught her, and was the confidant of both David and Isabel on matters related to Ethan's well-being. Claire had visited the United States twice in those 6 months, bringing gifts, stories from France, and overwhelming affection for Ethan. The French aunt had fallen in love with the ranch and Brazilian customs, and was already planning a permanent move to be closer to her beloved nephew. "Aunt Claire is going to live here too?" Ethan had asked during his aunt's last visit. "If you all accept me, my little prince," she replied in English that improved every day. And of course, she would be accepted. The family was learning that love knows no borders or limitations, and that the more genuinely loving people around Ethan, the better it would be for his development as a person. As for Victoria, she had completely disappeared from their lives after the legal proceedings. Convicted of male interception and attempted illegal appropriation, she was serving community service in Chicago and was prohibited from approaching the Montgomery family. David occasionally wondered how he had been so blind to her true feelings, but he had learned not to torment himself with useless regrets. What mattered was the present and the future they were building together. On a particularly beautiful December afternoon, with the apple trees laden with fruit and the scent of coffee flowers in the air, the family gathered on the porch for an important decision. Ethan, now mature enough to have an opinion, should choose his own full name. "I want to be Ethan Montgomery Du Bois," the boy declared with conviction. "With both my dad's and mom's last names together." "Perfect," both parents agreed, moved by their son's wisdom. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Ethan ran through the yard chasing butterflies, his laughter echoing across the property like celestial music. Isabel and David watched from afar, no longer as a couple, but as dedicated partners in the most important mission of their lives, raising a happy, secure, and loved boy. Mary, from the kitchen window where she was preparing dinner, smiled at the scene. The smell of fresh cheese bread wafted through the house, mingling with the jasmine scent coming from the garden. The Montgomery Ranch had returned to what it was always meant to be, a home where true love thrived and where a child could grow surrounded by people who loved him unconditionally. And when the stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky, Ethan fell asleep in his bed, lulled by Isabel's soft voice singing a French song about little birds that fly far away but always return home because they know where their true nest is. The Montgomery family had. I learned the most valuable of all lessons, that true love always finds a way back home, and that the right people come into our lives exactly when we need them the most. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until now, comment, "I watched until now," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's going to be very exciting.